Today we are taking a look at the leader of the Ninja Force and the last Grand Master of the Ashrakage clan, Ninja Force, Arctic Mission, Storm Shadow, and comparing him to his vintage self from 1992. Hey everyone, welcome back to Toy Habits, and today we are taking a detailed look at the Amazon exclusive Arctic Mission Storm Shadow figure body part by body part, and also doing a comparison with his Ninja Force vintage figure counterpart from 1992. And let's start off like we usually do by looking at the front of the box, and the Arctic Mission Storm Shadow comes in the G.I. Joe Classified Series window display, and you can see all of his cool accessories there right in front of you. And taking a look at the side of the box, you have a very cool pose for Arctic Mission Storm Shadow, and typically I don't like this animation style, but it seems to work for this figure. I love the whites and how they play off with the blues, and I do also like the outline of the pink. I think it really sets the illustration off very nicely. And on the side of the box, we have Storm Shadow holding his bow, which is a very cool pose. And if we zero in on his hood, you can actually see some cool detail here, so let's do that now. And one of the cooler things about this box is that when you zero in on Storm Shadow, you can actually see a ton more detail. Now, the detail was pretty apparent in the white on his hood, but as you zero in closer, you get to see some detail on his face mask, which is really cool. And moving down the box, we do see these blue and fuchsia colors just bleeding over to the front, which I really like. And you do get to see part of Storm Shadow's elbow on the side of the box as well. And it's a fact that I really love about these boxes. All right, and looking at the other side of the box, we can see what Storm Shadow is known for. He is a level 4 at Covert Ops. He is a level 3 at wielding bladed weapons. He is a level 3 at Infiltration, and he is a level 4 at Ninjutsu, which you would expect from the last Grand Master of the Ashrakage clan. And now that Storm Shadow's out of the box, let's first take a look at his head sculpt. And the first thing that you'll notice right off the bat is that he is wearing a removable hood, and you can see the diamond texturing that they've given it here. And I think the hood looks really nice all around. It's bunchy and baggy, and it looks like a flowing hood. It looks really great from the back, but I'm not too fond of the way that it lays in the front. I think it's too angled and it just looks too unnatural. So I really wish that they might have just put a sculpted hood on him, because I think these types of hoods, you can either get them right or you can really get them wrong. And this one is a little bit in between. It just looks slightly off. And taking off his hood, we get to see what Storm Shadow's head sculpt looks like underneath, and I think it looks absolutely fantastic. I love the way that they've varied the texture and the lines, and I love that they've given him a straight black front face mask that goes over his nose and also part of his mouth. So I'm really glad that they didn't put that cross-hatching detail on his mask there. And turning it around to the side, you can see the sculpting detail that goes around his head and all the way to the back. And I do love the sculpting detail that they provided back here, because it just makes the mask a lot more interesting and a lot more detailed and very cool to look at if you leave him without his hood on. One of the favorite parts of the masks figures for me are the way that the eyes peek out of the slits that they've cut out in the masks, and Hasbro's done a great job at sculpting the eyes and sculpting the eyebrows and giving him a little furrowed brow look, so you can see the emotion pouring through his face even though his mask is covering it. Another aspect that I really like about the way this head sculpt is the way that they've dealt with the neck in that area right over here. So they've basically given him his suit that bleeds all the way up into his mask, and I think that looks fantastic. I think it goes really well, and you can actually see some of the detail that they've given it with some sculpting lines as well as the texturing detail that they've provided here. I also like the fact that this part is not a uniform piece and it's not centered. It's off-centered, which gives the figure a lot of character for such a minor detail, but it's these little small details that can make or break a figure. And taking a look at his upper torso, there is a lot here to feast your eyes on. So let's look at his chest armor, and I love the way that this is sectioned off at the breastplate, and they've given it some riveting detail. They've also placed a gold Ashrakage symbol, and they've given him some gold and black straps that go across his shoulders, and I love the way that this armor is layered. And if you take a look, it's actually a flexi piece of armor, although this thing is molded to him. They didn't mold the armor on his shoulders, which I think it gives a really, really nice look, and I love the layered look that they've given this figure. And if you peek underneath the armor, you can also see some of that texturing that's on his mask and just all over this figure, and there's even some texturing and some sculpting detail on the shoulder armor here. So I'm glad that they didn't just make this a white uniform piece, because that just would have been lost in this figure. And turning him around to the back, I love the way that his armor is presented here, and it really enshrouds the gold piece on his back, which I think is a really cool piece to put. So I love that they just didn't make this a straight black piece, because typically you don't really display your figures from the back. So I love all the sculpting detail that they have in his armor here. I love that the armor comes down, and I do love that gold piece that centers around the peg where you put his backpack. Now I'm trying to figure out whether his black suit is armor or if it's clothing, because the way that they've sculpted it, it definitely looks like armor to me. There's a lot of angles, and there's a lot of riveting and a lot of texture detail that they've put underneath the arm here, and I'm fooled, but maybe somebody else knows if this is supposed to be clothing or armor. It would be amazing to know, because they did such a great job sculpting this figure that I can't really tell. And maybe I can get a clue by looking at his arms, because there is not a lot of sculpting detail here, so maybe it's part clothing and part armor. And his arms look amazing. There is so much texturing and so much detail that they've put on his arm. So on his forearm, you have some forearm armor kind of bleeding up to a really nice elbow armor that has a point that's going up into his bicep. You also have the texturing detail here and some sculpting detail on his bicep, which I think is really cool. There is just so much depth and dimension just in the arms alone. And his right arm is the same as the left, but if you zero in on the texturing, you can see it running all the way up his arm. And so this makes me think that this is a part armor and part clothing piece for him. And moving down to his waist, and sorry y'all, there is not an obligatory crotch shot today because his crotch is covered up. Now, all I can say about this piece is that it's a myriad of textures and layers. There's a ton of pouches and a ton of gear that Storm Shadow can carry around. I do love the gold detail on his belt, and I love the way that the black plays off the white here, and they even added some sculpting detail just to make his front piece a lot more interesting. I think it's a very cool piece, and it goes very well with his upper armor. And if we've turned him around to the back, you can see the pouches continue around to the side. And when you get to the back of this piece is absolutely amazing from the back. I love the sculpting detail here and just the layering look that they've given it. The cloth goes right down the middle, and you have two pouches on his back, and just the presentation of this figure from the back just makes me want to display him from the back. I know that's weird to say, but I really like the way he looks from the back versus the front. And looking at his pants, there's not much you can see from his pants because they are covered up. But from what you can see, they do have sculpting detail here and just a lot of dimension in the pants, which is great because it's a single black piece. And so that detail tends to get lost there, but the way that they've sculpted it really makes it stand out. Now, as much as I love this figure, I'm not super fond of the way that his boots were sculpted. And I'm actually not sure if the design department were confused as well, because it looks like a half boot and a half shoe, where it looks like you have his feet sticking out here. So are these sandals? Are they boots? I really don't know. But that said, the knee armor looks really cool the way they've layered it. And if you turn the figure around, the armor from the back, again, looks pretty amazing. I love the sculpting detail that they put back here, which really completes the look of the figure for me from the back. And question for everyone out there, are you going to display this figure with the hood or without the hood? Personally, I think without the hood looks amazing, and I want to display this figure without the hood. I know it's not a traditional look, but let's put the hood back on just for comparison's sake. So yeah, I think the reasons why I don't like the hood here is from what I was explaining before. I think the hood just looks really weird from the front. I do like the detail that they put on it, but I think the figure looks really amazing without it. So if I can get this thing back off, we will be displaying this figure without the hood. And Storm Shadow comes with a lot of accessories, so let's first take a look at the arrow. And the arrow is pretty basic, although they did give it some detail back here. And I really like the way this looks, although I'm not super fond of it being white. Next up, let's take a look at his grappling hook and the cord. And again, it's really a basic grappling hook, and I'm really not sure why he comes with this accessory, but maybe he's got to scale some mountains in the snow to do some undercover covert ops. Next up, we have his comma, or this is sometimes called a sickle, but I really love the way that this is detailed with the handle here, and I also love that it has some riveting detail up here, which makes me think that this is metal on some sort of wooden handle here. Next up, we have his bow, and I love the way that his bow is colored and the way that it's sculpted. I think the golds and the blacks play really nice off of each other, and they look really cool just in the total package of this figure. You can see that they've added some detail up here, which gives it a little bit more interesting look. They have some rivets on the handle, and they do have some wrapping that they've put on the handle here as well. And next up, let's take a look at his quiver, and this is a non-functioning quiver. You can't actually take the arrows out, and I love the way that this is sculpted, and it just looks like it is holding all these arrows just the way that this is sculpted here. It's indented, and there's some straps that go around it. There's also a gold Ashfakage symbol, which looks really, really nice. Also, the gold arrows in here just make it look really, really cool. Next up, let's look at his sheath, and his sheath is pretty basic, but they did give it some weaving detail around it, and I'm not actually sure why it has a hole in the center of it. I know why it has a plug, but I'm really confused as to why this has a hole right smack dab in the middle of it. And last but not least, let's take a look at his sword, and I love the way that his sword is detailed here. I love the handle, and I do actually love that they made the blade of the sword in silver, because it would have looked really weird if it was white. And as you can see, there is another Ashfakage symbol down here, and if we bring in Snake Eyes' sword, you can actually see that he has one down there as well. So I really like the way that they've done that, and I think that really gives the sword a much cooler dimension, and I think it just makes it a lot more special for the folks that know what these are. And finally, let's take a look at how his accessories play off of each other. And if we take his quiver, you can see that there's a port in the back for his sheath to plug into, and you can just plug it in like so. And his sword, of course, goes in the sheath, so we can take a look at how the quiver and the sword and the sheath look against each other. And I think they look great, and they're going to look even better when they're attached to the figure. And once you put these together, you do have all these orphan accessories here. So we have an arrow that doesn't go anywhere. It does not plug into anything. We have a grappling hook that doesn't hook on or plug into anything either. We have his sickle or his comma that he'll have to hold, and he does also have to hold his bow. And I wish they had a place for his bow, because that would have looked amazing attached to the quiver. And here is Storm Shadow all geared up. He's holding his arrow, he's holding his bow, and I did put his hood back on him because I think he actually looks pretty cool in his pose with his hood holding his bow. So I think if I actually do display him, I will display him holding these accessories, because I think they complement the hood very well. And here is how he looks from the back, and you can see his sword and sheath and how they plug into the quiver to make that really cool effect of just all of these layered accessories on Storm Shadow. And on to my favorite part of this segment is the vintage figure comparison with the G.I. Joe classified figure. So let's break down the similarities and differences between the two. And let's first start with the weapons, just to get those out of the way. And I love that they had put a sickle or a comma packed in with, yes, you can bow to your master, sure. Yeah, his waist is a little loose, but I love that the way that they had put the commas in there and just paying homage to the vintage figure, as it was also packed with one of those as well. And they also packed the Storm Shadow with a sword, and if you look at the vintage figure, it also has a sword as well. So I think they did a great job just paying homage to the vintage figure in the weapons department. Now, I think the easiest thing to do is just start from the head and go all the way to the bottom. So taking a look at their head sculpts, I think the G.I. Joe classified figure pays a really great homage to the vintage figure, because the head sculpts are very similar. Although the vintage figure comes with a sculpted hood on his head, the G.I. Joe classified series Storm Shadow comes with a removable hood, but I think overall the presentation looks very similar, even the way that they did the eyes coming out of the mask. And you do also see gold detailing on these figures, and although they are different shades of gold, I think the different shades work really good on the vintage figure and they fit the G.I. Joe classified figure. So I don't know if they should have used the same color gold, but I think any color gold like these would look great on these figures. And the vintage Storm Shadow comes with grenades and throwing stars, and they decided to strip that off of the G.I. Joe classified series figure, and for good reason. He's got some armor, and I think it just would have looked too clunky and maybe looked more like Firefly than Storm Shadow if he had all that gear on his shoulders. And moving down to the torso, you can also see the paint apps are really similar. They've given him that black and white detailing on the paint app, and they've chosen to give the G.I. Joe classified Storm Shadow this waist piece that hangs over his crotch, and that is missing in the vintage Storm Shadow here. And finally, down to the boots. The boots are very different, but they do have a similar effect. The vintage figure is white, and they had given the Storm Shadow figure from the G.I. Joe classified line a mix of blacks and whites, which I think looks really good for the classified figure. And last thing here is that the vintage figure comes with a sash, and I'm actually not sure if this is actually called anything, which is par for the course for this particular review because I don't have a clue as to what some of these things are named, but it is not present on the G.I. Joe classified series figure, and maybe this is why the G.I. Joe classified series figure was given this waist piece and this figure was given a sash. So maybe this is a nod to the sash. Okay, to be honest, I was not sure if I was going to like this figure when I first saw it, so I have to keep it real, but after getting my hands on him, I have totally changed my tune. I think overall, the sculpting detail, textures, and paint app are some of the best I've seen on a G.I. Joe classified figure. What are your thoughts on this figure? Let us know in the comments below, and if you like this review, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe on your way out.